Matt Segall. He's an amazing human being on many levels, and he's really brilliant. I really mean that when I say that. I don't know anybody else in the PCC program who can spout out amazingness of philosophy from all ages like Matt can. And those of you that are nodding your heads, you know it's true, because,
Bullshit's the technical.
Footnotes to Plato. That's all I can say. Look at his blog. It's pretty amazing. So Matt is a doctoral student in the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program here, and his dissertation focuses primarily on the role of imagination in the philosophical integration of scientific theory and religious myth. He is the author of several articles and books, including a long list, and as I said, check out footnotes to Plato.com for his blog. Please welcome Matt.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Natalie, for that warm introduction. And thanks to Jeff for initially proposing the idea of having a night like this where we could all share some ideas and learn from each other. And to Larry and the whole ERIE crew for creating this space for us to be able to come together. And also thanks to you, Jeff, and to Chad for letting me go last, because it really helps me to be able to absorb the insights that you were sharing, to incorporate it into what I have to say. And we wanted to meet over the course of the last week several times, and we just couldn't make it happen with our busy schedules to make sure that our talks were coherent and were able to hang together in a way that would synergize. And it turns out, even without us having met, a lot of what I have to say was already touched on in your presentations, as we'll see as I go along here. So the title of my talk is The Psychedelic Eucharist. A subtitle towards a pharmacological philosophy of religion. So that's a mouthful. I'll unpack all of that in a minute. But just to set things up here, history it's always a story that we tell in the present in order to serve the needs of the present. And part of what I'm attempting to do here is offer an alternative version of the origins of Western philosophy and Western culture, Western consciousness really in ancient Greece. Because the typical story we are told, I think, serves the dominant paradigm, which we all learn in school, that democracy and science and rational thought and logic were all born in ancient Greece, and we value that heritage because of all of those things that we've gained from them. And it's true that those great things, all things that we would associate with daytime consciousness, to be symbolic about it, did indeed come from Greece. But what we are not taught in school, what we don't learn as part of our origin story as Westerners, is that all of that stuff emerged in the context of a vibrant psychedelic religion. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all of the major thinkers and politicians, in fact, every Greek person just about living for about 2,000 or 3,000 years was initiated into the Eleusinian mystery rites. And it's pretty obvious why this more lunar or nighttime form of consciousness that would have been fostered by these experiences, pretty clear why that would be suppressed, why we would erase that from our history, because it certainly doesn't serve the dominant narratives of our industrial capitalist world. So I'm going to try to tell an alternative version of this history, and do that by giving a sort of alternative reading of Plato, of his philosophy, of Platonism. So rather than Plato, the rationalist, I'm going to offer a vision of Plato as the psychedelic initiate, so that we can, as Westerners, reclaim our psychedelic roots. So just to sort of kick things off here in a simple way, what are psychedelics? It's such a fun question to ask. I'm sure everyone here has their own exciting, unique answer to that question. I choose the word psychedelic only because, it rolls off my tongue nicely, and it was coined, of course, by Humphrey Osmond in a letter that he wrote to Aldous Huxley in the 50s, I believe. It means mind manifesting or soul manifesting or soul making, you might even say. And I chose this term as opposed to entheogen, which I agree with the need to resituate these chemical substances in a more sacramental context. I think that's important. Psychedelic doesn't necessarily convey that as well as entheogen. But this idea of manifesting the divine within, I think, leaves out something important about the psychedelic experience, which is that it also allows us to become aware of and sensitive to the divine outside of us. So it's not just about the inner experience. I think that tends to lend support to those who would want to describe these as hallucinogens, as though when you take these chemicals, it's only your inner experience that's being altered, and that has nothing to do with the nature of reality itself outside you, right? I think it does have something to do with these experiences are revelatory of the nature of reality. So we shouldn't just think of them as changing our inner experience. They're also changing what we think of as the outside environment. So what are psychedelics? I think psychedelics are substances that, when smoked, snorted, chewed, injected, or transdermally absorbed through our skin, they allow us to participate in and make us aware of what you might call the divine imagination. We're probably all students of Terence McKenna, so I'm going to allow him to unpack this notion of the divine imagination for us a little bit. He says, this is from the trilogues that he did with Rupert Sheldrake and Ralph Abraham at Esalen. Terence says, I think of the divine imagination as the class of all things both possible and beautiful in a kind of reverse Platonism. And this notion of reversed or inverted Platonism will come up again in a minute. So Terence goes on to equate divine imagination with chaos, and he's speaking mythically there in terms of the divine presence of chaos as invoked by Hesiod. And Terence wants to make sure that we understand that chaos is not the enemy of order, but the birthplace of order. Right? Terence also says, psychedelics somehow change our channel from the evolutionary important channel, giving traffic, weather, and stock market reports, to the one playing the classical music of an alien civilization. In other words, we tend to tune to the channel that has a big payback in the immediate world. Our normal consciousness is tuned to that channel. It seems obvious to me that there are channels of the imagination that are not so tailored for human consumption. The divine imagination, then, is the reality behind the appearances of our everyday consciousness. The appearances of our everyday consciousness are simply the local slice of the divine imagination. And he goes on to say that what psychedelics reveal is so intense and extreme an example that it argues strongly that the imagination is not the human imagination at all. The psychedelic experience at its most intense levels goes beyond the terms of human motivation. It seems rather to enter an ontological reality of its own, one that the human being is simply privileged to observe briefly. To my mind, the divine imagination is the source of all creativity in our dreams, in our psychedelic experiences, in the jungles, in the currents of the ocean, and in the organization of protozoan and microbial life. So the divine imagination is this sort of plenum or substratum of potentials that haven't yet actualized, but that could actualize. It's a realm of possibilities. And when we ingest these substances that we call psychedelic or entheogenic, or Richard Doyle has a great term, ecodelic, to emphasize the way in which they open us to the environment, not just to our inner experience, what we're doing is, as Jeff said, we're opening the sensory gates of the thalamus and allowing all of this information to pour in that we wouldn't otherwise be conscious of. And with the right dosage, that information reaches such a pitch that we could describe it as participating in the divine imagination. And what Terence is saying is that the human imagination actually opens out into this wider divine, or you could say cosmic imagination or creative principle. So then the Eucharist. Why the psychedelic Eucharist? Of course, the Eucharist is another name for communion. It's a ritual that is still practiced by Christianity to this day, but it has very, very ancient roots, and in fact it could be the most ancient, at least in terms of the rituals that survive, one of the most ancient rituals that we still know about. So the Christians appropriated it from the Eleusinian mystery rites, who appropriated it from Crete and other civilizations which practiced these basically goddess worshipping fertility rites. When they were practiced on the island of Crete, up until around 1500 BCE, I think, they were public. They were celebrated out in the open in the streets. And when the Macedonians came in and conquered them and brought their patriarchal culture, these goddess celebrations, fertility rites, had to go underground. And that's what became the Eleusinian mystery rites. They're an attempt to preserve the experience, the transcendent and also immanent, or incendent, to use one of Thomas Berry's words that kind of blends the transcendent and the immanent, to try to preserve those powerful experiences in a secret context, so that the watchful eyes of the patriarchs couldn't see them, couldn't find them, couldn't destroy them. So in invoking the Eucharist and ritual in general, really, I'm trying to resituate psychedelics in the context of these ritual practices, of these communal experiences, very intentionally designed experiences that help human beings overcome their fear of death, ultimately. So let's move on now back to philosophy for a second. This is a painting of Socrates about to drink a heroic dose of hemlock. He knows it's going to be an intense trip, so intense that he will never, in fact, return to be the ego known as Socrates in that body. But he's ready for it. You notice all of his students around him, they're crying. They must not have been initiated into the Eleusinian mystery rites, because part of that experience, as Socrates understood, really allowed you to relinquish your fear of death, because it gives you a glimpse of the other side. It allows you to die before, it's a death before death, so to speak. It allows you to die before your body dies. The soul experiences death before the body dies, such that one relinquishes that existential fear of death. And Socrates is actually quite excited to drink that. He's lived his life already here on earth, and he's ready to experience the next great adventure. And what we're witnessing here in this event, as it was depicted by Plato in one of his dialogues, is really, I think, the birth of philosophy. The birth of philosophy is the death of Socrates. Socrates famously said that philosophizing is learning to die. So I think it's very clear then the links between the origins of philosophy and Socrates' teaching and the main insights that are gained through the experience of the Eleusinian mystery rites. One of the things that I think the psychedelic experience reveals to us is the lack of any solid foundation or ground upon which our experience rests. We come to see that the ego is actually, well, it's not really what we think it is. It's not an enduring, substantial entity that we have in an unchanging way throughout our lives. That in many ways, the ego is a reflection of other people's experience of us, and that what we think of as the physical world is really far more energetic and vibrant and active than our normal everyday waking consciousness allows us to perceive. So I think one of the main insights of psychedelics is it reveals the groundlessness of reality. And again, allowing us to participate in the divine imagination, we're no longer so focused on what's already actual, but on what's possible. And that in our positive experiences on psychedelics, we really do begin to realize how easily we could transform the world overnight, because we are able to see those possibilities and see how easily they could be manifested. And then we come down, of course, and realize how much hard work it's going to take to do that. But nonetheless, we've glimpsed those ideas, those possibilities, and without glimpsing them, we wouldn't even start trying to manifest them. So everyone, I hope, knows about Plato's allegory of the cave. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this, and then, again, offer an alternative reading of it than the one that we normally think Plato was trying to offer us. So in Plato's allegory of the cave, in his dialogue, The Republic, in order to illustrate his ontology, his theory of reality, he asks us to imagine that there are people chained up in a cave. They were born in this cave. They've never seen the outside, and there's a wall behind them, and they're sort of forced to look at the shadows on this wall that are being created by this elite caste of rulers. And they think that they've invented this language to talk about these objects, these shadows on the wall that they think are real, and they hear the voices of the people behind them reflecting off the wall. So they think that that's reality. And Socrates speaking, he asked us to imagine, no, actually it's Glaucon speaking in the dialogue. He asked us to imagine if one of these people chained was able to break out and turn to face the fire behind that's allowing these shadows to be created. And at first he would probably be in a lot of pain. It would hurt his eyes. It would take a while to adjust to the brightness of the fire. And then if he made his way all the way up and got to the outside of the cave, it would be really disorienting at first. And when he finally got used to it, he would see the sun in the sky and the stars at night, and it would be this revelatory kind of Uranian experience of awakening. And the idea here is, if we translate the allegory into Plato's theory of reality, it's that basically the physical sensory world that we experience through our bodies is a kind of illusion. And not only is it an illusion, it's an illusion of an illusion. There's a double distance between our experience of the physical world and the actual true forms or ideas that exist in heaven and that inform this physical world. Because we see things with our physical senses and we reflect on them and develop these abstract ways of thinking about the physical world in terms of the laws of physics and so on. Plato doesn't think that the laws of physics are actually the ultimate reality either. There's an even higher reality behind those laws manifesting them. So that's why when we see with our senses, as the normal interpretation of Plato goes, we're twice removed from the reality. But now if we invert Plato, as Terence invites us to, if we turn Plato upside down, we can see how actually this allegory of the cave might allow us to articulate not a sort of two worlds theory of reality, where there are the divine eternal forms in one world and then the sensory material world down here, which is corrupt, and that what we really want to do is escape it. Rather than thinking of it that way, we can think of it as Plato's attempt to articulate what you might call an aesthetic ontology. Aesthetics, the study of beauty, of our experience of the form and the order of the sensory world. And that in some sense it's images on the cave wall all the way up. This is one of the first insights I had on psychedelics was, groundlessness is one way to describe it. Another way to describe it is in terms of reality just being a series of veils, and you remove one and then you just see another veil. You remove that, there's another veil, and you don't actually ever get to some ground, some source. But then again, it seems like the nature of source is such that it likes to veil itself. It likes to veil itself so that it can be unveiled, because isn't that fun, right? And I think what this sort of aesthetic ontology suggests is as a theory of reality, its appearance all the way down in some sense, but recognizing that its appearance all the way down is still a kind of truth. And so you're initiated into an insight into the nature of reality, that it's all appearance. And then from there, I think it's clear that, then what is the purpose of our lives if it's all appearance? Well, it's to play. So, Plato takes play very seriously. He says that human beings are the playthings of the gods, and that to connect with the gods, we got to take play seriously. Serious play is ritual. That's what ritual is. It's allowing us to step into a time out of time where we're no longer bound to the everyday world of work and clocking in and toiling to survive. When we play, we enter into this sort of eternal space where our experience is an end in itself because it's joyous, it's beautiful. Ritual is traditionally a way of allowing us to do that. Now, part of the problem with our modern day rituals, especially as they survive in the Christian church, which is the Christians around 390 of the Common Era were responsible for destroying the temple of Demeter in Eleusis, and they destroyed the Eleusinian mystery rites, brought them to an end, only to appropriate the symbolism for their own ritual of communion. But the problem with the communion ritual is that the wafers and the wine, it's not psychedelic anymore. As Terence says, it has to be understood that psychedelics are not metaphors for sacraments. They are real sacraments, and their efficaciousness can have political consequences. So, the Eleusinian mystery rites, it was a 9-day festival. It happened every year. People from all over Greece traveled there. There were various levels of initiation. When you go the first year, you get a lower level of initiation, and you have to come back the next year and build your way up to the big, highest mystery. And the experience of that higher mystery involves being put through 9 days of purification. 9 days, I think, symbolizes the 9 months of the birth process, before finally on the last night you're brought into a cave, and it's pitch black, and there's a bunch of other initiates around you, and it I think is very much like the experience of moving out of that more Neptunian space where their initiates are arriving there, their normal life was pretty okay, and they're here for this initiation, and they get stuffed into this sort of Saturnian enclosure, and it's dark, and they feel stuck, and then all of a sudden they're pushed from behind to move through this labyrinthine tunnel underground, which is the plutonic element of the perinatal process that Stan Groff described and that Chad was introducing us to. Before finally, after you're pushed through for a while, you reach a higher platform, and you start to see, it would have been a long line of initiates curving around this tunnel, and you get to a high point, you can look down and see from a higher perspective than you could before those members of this group who are still down below being pushed around, not knowing what's going to happen to them. And then finally you break through into this other room that's just filled with light. And this was at nighttime, so they must have had torches everywhere and highly reflective paint on the ceilings, and it's just this grand awakening, a sort of Uranian archetypal energy, obviously, and a rebirth is allowed to take place. Here's Demeter, goddess of vegetation, Mother Earth, you could say, and there would have been a giant statue of her in this bright cathedral-like space that they entered into. Of course, all of this is coming from reports from people who experienced the mystery rites that couldn't keep their mouth shut because it was supposed to be secret. And in Athens, you could be killed for speaking up about what happened at this temple. But luckily, a few people were gossipers, like I tend to be, and shared this information with us. So part of the symbolic or mythic context of these initiations involved the myth of Demeter and Persephone. Maybe some of you know it. The brief synopsis is that Persephone was wandering in a field of flowers and accidentally stumbled into a cave, or Hades appeared and helped lure her into the cave, and she got lost down there, and her mother, Demeter, was distraught, came to Earth looking for her, spent 9 days looking for her. Finally, she pleaded to Zeus to help her get Persephone back, and Zeus was like, well, Hades is having a good time, why don't you just let her stay there? And Demeter wasn't having it. She decided to prevent any vegetation from growing on the earth until this was rectified, so Zeus finally gave in. He sent Hermes into hell to retrieve Persephone, bring her back up, presented her to Demeter. They embraced. Demeter then says, oh no, you didn't eat anything while you were down there, did you? Turns out she did. She had a couple pomegranate seeds. And, the strange logic of myth, I don't really know why this is, but because she ate something while she was in hell, it means that she has to spend a third of the year down there now, and only 2/3 of the year up above ground with the rest of the gods. Now, what this is meant to symbolize, if you didn't catch it, is the seasonal cycles of the growth of vegetation, the sort of mystery of the process of moving from seed to stems and leaves, to the bud, to the flower, to the fruit, and then back to seeds again. And you can see the cyclical process, the generative process of plants very clearly. And this is agriculture is the basis of civilization, of course. And the Greeks were really mystified by that process, but they recognized the way in which that cycle of life probably holds true of the cycle of human life too, and that with our own death, what we've really done through the course of our life is produce this seed that can then, at our death, be replanted to be potentially reborn again in a different form. And a recognition of the parallel between the cycle of death and rebirth in plants and the cycle of death and rebirth in human beings is part of what allowed the initiates to relinquish their fear of death and to engage in life in a more playful way, to engage in ritual as a celebration of life rather than as an attempt. Nowadays, it seems like people go to church in order to make sure that when they die, they're going to go to the right place, and it's a way of doing their duty or something. It's not supposed to be work. Ritual is supposed to be play. And I think that that's how the Greeks understood it. So I'm out of time. There's more I wanted to say, but we'll just have to wait until we do this again sometime soon. So thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. I enjoy that. I've been very interested recently in how did the Greek civilization move from Greek shamanism and animism into Greek rationality in the space of a few generations. And between Parmenides and Plato, it wasn't very long. Do you have any insight into that, and do you think the Macedonian invasion was critical of that process?
It probably helped with that transition. I also think the alphabet played a large role. Psychedelics transform consciousness in a powerful way. Well, so does the alphabet. Plato, in particular, was living in this transitional period when the alphabet was still new enough that he recognized the effects it was having on society. Of course, he, at least through the mouthpiece of Socrates, famously kind of put writing down for various reasons. It ruins our memory. Like oral cultures, the Homeric Greece, where you had poets that would perform these myths for people, these epic poems, purely from memory. It's really an astonishing feat that we literate people cannot even approach at all, because we rely so heavily now on external forms of memory. And Plato also said, even though he was a brilliant writer and poet himself, published thousands of pages of writing, he said that in a letter, he never wrote down any of his true teachings. So nothing that he actually conveyed to his students in person was included in his dialogues. His dialogues were meant for public consumption, and there's a deeper meaning to the dialogues, but you're not going to get the deeper meaning unless you're in class with him in a face-to-face environment where a communion of souls can take place. So, yeah, I think part of what led to this growth of sort of disembodied rationality and a distancing from nature and from animism was definitely the alphabet. David Abrams, a great source to learn more about this. It's The Spell of the Sensuous. His book is great on this topic.
Awesome. Great talk. Thanks a lot. I was wondering, you mentioned play, and I was wondering what your thoughts and feelings are on creativity and creating within the field of play, and co-creativity specifically, poesis and co-poesis, and subjectivity.
Play definitely entering into that relaxed field that play allows for definitely enhances creativity. Whenever we're trying to solve a problem and we've been working at it really hard, I think more often than not, the best thing to do is either sleep on it and see what happens in your dreams in that state of relaxation, and play is another thing to do. We call it recreation these days, but usually we think of recreation as just a way of resting up before we have to go back to work again, so it serves that kind of utilitarian function. But play should be an end in itself, right? And it definitely does foster creativity, and not just in human beings. I think evolutionarily speaking, we see play in all mammalian life plays, and even all life. I think there's evidence that that play is pervasive throughout the animal kingdom, and it's hard for evolutionary biologists to explain why animals should play, because it doesn't seem to serve any immediate evolutionary function. It doesn't seem to enhance survival. It's a sort of, they refer to it, instead of being an online behavior, such as trying to find food or trying to find a mate, it's an offline behavior, and it's an end in itself, and animals do it just because they enjoy it. It's not necessarily enhancing their survival. Maybe it in a indirect way will enhance survival because they're more coordinated or whatever, but it facilitates evolution by allowing animals to explore the space of possibilities that they wouldn't otherwise have access to if they were just focused on surviving all the time. All right, so it enhances human creativity, and it enhances the creativity of all life, I think.
I had a comment and a question.
Okay.
A theory about the comment you had made about why are we favoring oneness. My theory is that oneness isn't more correct than separation, but if we think of life as a balancing act, then maybe for however long we've favored separation, and at this point it's too destructive. So we're going back to the other side of the spectrum to find balance. That was a thought. And the question I had was, if ultimately reality is a series of unveiling or interacting with an appearance until you pierce it, and then that leaves us to think, well, then maybe let's just have a good time while we're doing this and play with it, not take it all so seriously, then do you have a theory of like why ultimately existence exists?
How much time do I have?
The rest of your life.
Well, I think you just gave a pretty good answer to that question with your comment. You know, if the divine was just all one, it'd be pretty uninteresting. There'd be no one to play with. So why not create the appearance of separation in order to engage in a dance with that appearance. And even if we do recognize, if we do, in a sort of, they use the Greek term, anamnesis, if we remember that we're dealing with appearances and that ultimately everything is one, we can still play. And in fact, it's easier to play once you've had that recognition. And it doesn't cancel the difference that allows appearance to emerge. It makes it something that you can celebrate. That difference is something that can be celebrated and not escaped from.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you, everyone. Let's give a round of applause for Matthew for his wonderful talk.